are FDR's Franklin Delano Roosevelt's estate, most specifically the museum, where a lot of his presidential legacy is recorded, very well I may add. And I'm now going to hand over to my colleague so we can further explain why we're here and our intentions and such. Josh?
All right, so here's the man himself in statue form, and this is his museum. What we're looking at in the museum specifically is rhetoric when it comes to the language that the museum uses and the language and rhetoric that FDR himself used. We have to be thinking about this kind of thing in order to make a proper historical analysis. So without further ado, let's go inside, show you a little show of what we saw.
All right. So that was a long time.
Yeah, it did take a little bit. Okay.
All right.
So, I mean, what do you think about this whole thing?
I was kind of just thinking that I think you made a good point when you were talking about how well documented everything is.
Right.
Like all the cool videos they had at this point, or those nice interactive things that they had at some point.
Yeah.
But I still sort of feel like they definitely shortchanged Eleanor in there.
Yeah, they kind of shortchanged her.
Especially considering that she was often considered to be the president at one point, and they kind of didn't.
Yeah. See, the thing is, they gave her her own section, which was nice, but it made it feel like she was sort of an extension of him, rather than her own actor.
Yeah. It was also in the corner.
Yeah, kind of in the.
And it was like, what the heck?
Yeah. So I don't know, the whole thing with FDR. I mean, he was a guy, you know. I mean, I wrote my history paper. You know, I wrote the paper on the fact that he was kind of just a neutral guy.
Yeah.
And you know, just people were helping him, you know?
That's what's interesting. If you make that perspective, the museum does not talk about him as a neutral person.
He's God.
He's God.
In this, yeah.
It's literally there's this, that, and other thing. Which, I mean, you can't have a museum that's defiling somebody. But
right, of course.
You gotta make something down to earth.
Right, and they tried, they realized that they had to do that. They tried to add perspectives such as, here's some people who were against him.
Japanese Americans, African Americans, for some, until Eleanor was sort of this, that, and other thing.
And then letters, not liking his fireside chats, things like that.
Mm-hmm. They didn't talk about the New Deal stuff enough.
Right, right. Yeah, the New Deal controversy was not there at all.
I really didn't feel it. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I mean, but, you know, not to disparage the museum, because I'm about to get some nice stuff at the gift shop.
I mean, shoot.
You know.
And welcome to our podcast. My name is Sundai.
My name is Josh.
Our podcast is entitled No Place to Hide, HYDE. Josh, take it away.
All right, let's get started. When confronting history, you have to be wary that history doesn't confront you. By this I mean simply that oftentimes the language and rhetoric of a historical display can paint a picture that supports a predetermined message.
Bro, what are you talking about? Speak English, the English language. What my good friend here is trying to say is that we have to pay attention to the language and rhetoric that's being used when history is presented to us. For example, when words like heroic or incredible pop up in historical texts, it's probably a good idea to question, why is that word here?
Yeah, that sounds pretty good. For example, during our journey through the FDR Museum in Hyde Park, New York, President Roosevelt is described as, and I quote, a restorer of hope.
Exactly. While FDR probably restored hope for many people, it's always worth a second glance when such, encompassing language is being used.
Right. And of course, even when language is used with benevolent intentions, the bias of the conveyor can always shine through.
Again, what my friend is attempting to clarify is that even though bad intentions may not be present, someone or something that tells you history is always liable to accidentally include a bias.
Well, that's literally what I just said.
Well, yeah, I know, but I'm just trying to clarify, Josh.
All right. But yeah. Okay. So the museum trip, right? It was very important. It was very grade worthy.
Wait now. How are you going to warn against biased language and then immediately call our own project grade worthy?
Well, I was making an example. I'm glad you picked up on it, though. I wonder, did our audience pick up on it?
Now, come on now. Let's not interrogate them right now. Maybe we should begin by actually presenting some evidence.
What kind of evidence do you have in mind?
Well, actually, I'm glad you asked. Going back to your previous note concerning, whose hope was being restored, kind of reminded me of Japanese Americans.
All right, but how so?
Well, I remember this book, These United States, often pointed out during World War II how Japanese Americans were being oppressed, and even Eleanor Roosevelt saying that Japanese Americans would have to wait their turn for rights.
Yeah, that's kind of hard to see that with such overtly positive language concerning the Roosevelts.
That's the whole point. That these are people, not gods. People. Yes, political leaders, but by no means perfect ones.
Could you give another example to our lovely audience?
Sure thing. In the museum, I was really struck by a specific cartoon where Roosevelt was pointed out as a great partner with the U.S. Congress. No problems, and things were easy peasy. But no, it's by no means true. Roosevelt often had combatants, especially concerning the New Deal policies, and even some concerns of military aggressions around the World War II era.
Well, what about war?
Well, yeah, of course. During Pearl Harbor, following Pearl Harbor, Roosevelt took major action to be like, America, let's enter this war front. Let's get her done.
Roosevelt, huh?
Yeah.
You mean just Roosevelt? Well, I wrote a historiography paper relating to this exact sort of thing, and if I learned one thing from that, it's that Roosevelt was never alone in his actions.
Well, of course. I mean, he had his wife. I know he had his advisors and cabinet and such.
Well, he also had political envoys who he was open to an input from. According to scholarship, and I quote, sometimes, especially in his moments of irresolution, his envoys and advisors shifted his thinking.
So you just literally just had that whole quote just on you.
Yeah, of course.
Oh, of course.
Anyway, Roosevelt wasn't. He was never a lone actor in the United States political decisions. But the rhetoric of history regarding him, including the rhetoric found in this museum, paints him as solitary.
Examples being?
Well, think about this: the Obama administration, the Trump administration, the Bush administration. See a pattern?
Well, yeah, they all include the word administration. Duh. Also, I gave you that idea in the museum.
Yeah, anyway. So, it's not so in scholarship about FDR. Just look at the museum. FDR made decisions, FDR made laws, never his administration, always him.
Yeah, you know what? I did notice that. Because once again, I did remind you about that in the museum.
Yeah.
But maybe you're right. Maybe we do need to look out for the way that things are presented in history.
Well, that's the whole argument of this podcast. Well, are there any other examples that you can think of to that end?
You know what? We do keep name-dropping Eleanor, so I may as well formally address her. It's safe to say that Eleanor and Franklin Delano Roosevelt go hand in hand specifically when it comes to politics. But of course, they're married, of course, too. There were some points where she even made major administrative decisions, and according to some scholars, she is often called the first female president. And most scholars, if not all scholars, can agree that she was in a higher position of power compared to other first ladies. However, she only had a tiny corner devoted to her in the museum on her own estate.
Yeah, that's true. It was her property. And she lived there as much as FDR did, and it's not like she was an irrelevant figure. So why do I only think of FDR when I think of that place?
Why FDR? Maybe because it's the FDR Museum on the FDR estate, next to the FDR Museum, on FDR Drive, next to the FDR High School.
I guess I see a pattern.
You get my point.
But what does that naming scheme even say about the proprietors of the place? How do they view FDR? Frankly, I think it's a little bit deifying.
Yes, that's the perfect word. Wow. They're deifying him. And in my opinion, that's a sort of vague, easy to digest type of history.
Well, what do you mean by that?
Well, it's easy to deify, easy to say one man did it all, easy to glorify the president. You know what? That reminds me of something that my class got around to in my religion course.
That's a little bit off topic.
No, it's not. If you just hear me out.
All right. Okay.
All right, now hear me out. So there's this book that was written by this religious scholar, James Lane. The book's entitled Meta Religion, and it discusses, of course, things about religion, power, politics, and such like that. This and the other thing. But that's not really what I'm referring to. In the book, he brings up this point about civil religion.
Okay, and what does that have to do with FDR?
Well, civil religion was immediately compared to the deification of possibly secular entities such as constitutions, nationalistic principles, and presidencies. It was the prime reason why presidents such as George Washington or FDR could be compared and contrasted to European kings who also were often compared to divine beings. It's a sort of literal deification. You know what I mean?
You mean such as when reporters didn't photograph him in later years when his polio worsened, and when they did, it was to deflect and hide his illness in the first place.
Exactly. That's a moment where they sort of, were trying to change his physical appearance, going out of their way, going the extra mile to deify Roosevelt.
Oh, wow. This is a lot of info to process. You mind if I briefly recap before closing it out?
Yeah, sure. Go right ahead.
Well, we began by pointing out how the museum said that FDR was a, quote, restorer of hope. That was our first tip-off to the attention we had to pay to the way things were worded.
Right. Japanese-American voices were important to consider.
We then talked about FDR's not-so-perfect relationship with Congress.
Even though the museum painted a picture, very clear one, of constant cooperation.
Also, there was the fact that nobody ever mentions the Roosevelt administration, and the fact that he relied on envoys and advisors for many decisions.
And don't forget our girl Eleanor, not nearly as recognized as she should be.
Yeah, and there was the point on civil religion, driving home the idea that overall, FDR is deified.
Yeah, you got it. So what's the point?
Well, it chalks up to this. Just be careful what you take at face value before analyzing historical assertions.
I can dig it. Consider this a PSA. Analyze the language and rhetoric of everything before making final judgments.
Yeah, otherwise though, okay, FDR was a cool dude. I'm going to go back to that gift shop one day and buy an FDR plushie.
You don't think that's like a little creepy?
Nope. In fact, I think...
All right, and that might be a good reason to cut this short.
Okay then. I hope you folks enjoyed the presentation, I guess. It's been a blast.
Yep, same here. Over and out.